I thought we would start today with a old game, a game called The Price is Right. Who remembers The Price is Right? Was it Bruce? Was it Brucey? Yeah, Bruce. Some of you are like, well, who is Bruce? Bruce Forsyth is a legend. Anyway, here's the question this morning. Which one is the most valuable? Which one is the most valuable? If you wanted to put them in order, what order would you put them in? Who's brave enough to... Harry?
The car is the most expensive.
You think the car, the Lamborghini, the most expensive? Then what? What are you saying next?
The chair.
The chair, yeah. And then the cardigan. Hands up if you agree with Harry. Yeah, broadly. Okay. Well, it was a trick. The car, it's a model of a Lamborghini, all right? It's 80 quid. I mean, even a model of a Lamborghini costs 80 quid. The next one is a chair. It's an IKEA chair, but it's the kids' version. So it's a mini chair. It's cute. Still £120, but, you know. You did want to get one of them, Ella, I remember. So I want that chair. Anyone wants to donate Ella 120 quid? Be my guest. And this cardigan, it's not any old cardigan. It's a design, I've lost the name. It's an Italian, Cabrini or something like that. It's in the thousands. Guess how many thousands? Higher. Higher.
7.
Higher than 10. Lower than 20. It's 11. 11 grand. 11 grand for that cardigan. All right, well, it's easy to get values wrong, isn't it? Especially, as was the case just now, you didn't have all the information. You didn't have the full picture. But as soon as you have access to all the facts, well, then the true value becomes obvious. People tend to place a high value on the things they care about, don't they? So over the years, I shudder to think how much money I've spent on Millwall Football Club. Or travelling to games, buying tickets, buying replica shirts. But the reason I spend money on Millwall is because I'm a devoted Millwall supporter. They're on my heart. I've got an affection for them. So what we spend money on and how we act exposes where our heart, where our desire really lies, doesn't it? And in our passage this morning, we're going to find out what 4 different groups of people, or 4 different people, valued the most. We're going to see if, according to Jesus, they'd got their values right. And we're going to go ask the question, do we as 21st century Christians have our values right? Are we seeing the world from Jesus' perspective? What should we value the most? 4 people to meet, so we've got 4 points. We'll draw our lessons as we go. The first group we're introduced to are the chief priests and the scribes and the Pharisees. We've already met these guys over several weeks, haven't we? They are teachers of the law. They're the political elite. What did they value the most? Well, look at verses 1 and 2. It was now 2 days before the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Breads, and the chief priests and the scribes were seeking how to arrest him by stealth and kill him. For they said, not during the feast, lest there be an uproar from the people. Jesus isn't a physical threat to these men. His disciples are no match for the temple guards and the soldiers who back them. But Jesus has publicly questioned their power and their authority. And that's what these men valued the most, isn't it? You can sum it up as their status. They could not stand the fact that Jesus was publicly challenging them. Think about it. These are the men who hold all the strings of power in their community. If they were around today, they'd be the ones outside number 10 giving press conferences. They'd be on the panel of question time giving wise answers. But what have we witnessed? What have they witnessed in the last few days? Well, for 2.5 years, this rough-looking, rough-speaking, to them, uneducated carpenter has been undermining them at every opportunity. And the worst thing about this Jesus chap is that he's not bothered if he upsets them. He's called them vipers. He's openly cursed them. He's gone to their banquets and insulted them to their faces. Now, that might not be too bad if the ordinary folk realise that this carpenter's a bit dodgy, but actually the general population, Joe Public, they absolutely adore him. They claim that he does miracles. They claim that he can feed them and heal them. And they love his sermons. They don't understand half of what he says. He tells stories. They don't really get it. But when he does give them instructions, well, it ain't all the wishy-washy stuff they hear in the synagogue. This guy says it like he means it. He says it with authority. It's almost as if he was speaking on behalf of God himself. And now that the people love him, they love him more than the priests and the experts. And even last week, this northerner, this country bumpkin, the man who surrounds himself with a gang of blue-collar workers and outcasts and traitors, well, he's even had the audacity to preach in the temple courts. I mean, this guy's not a priest, he's not a registered rabbi, yet he's on our patch. He's in our temple telling our people what to do. He's even been throwing furniture around. Who does he think he is? And the most infuriating thing is, try as they might, they cannot catch him out. Every tricky question, every complication, every riddle they throw at him, he's got an answer for it. They think if we don't put a stop to this guy right now, the people are going to crown him as king. They're going to recognise him as Messiah. And where will that leave us, they think to themselves? Well, we'll end up dead. Either at the hands of this new Messiah or at the hands of Romans as they squash the rebellion. So it's either him or us, they tell themselves. This is our last opportunity to nab him. Passover's about to begin. He's in town. Let's get him now before it's too late. Not in front of the people, though. That would make us look bad. In fact, they might riot. And that leaves us with a problem. Where does this guy go at night? Where can we ambush him in secret, away from the crowds? They look at each other. I don't know where he goes at night. So they're stuck. Up until verse 10. Then Judas Iscariot, who was one of the 12, went to the chief priests in order to betray him to them. And when they heard it, they were glad and promised to give him money. And he sought an opportunity to betray him. See how these men are willing to pay to maintain their status. They would rather have a dead Jesus than a king Jesus. So, Christian friend, what do you value most? Do you value your status or do you value the king? Here's a simple test. How do you know who you value most? Well, someone who values their status above Jesus's will never tell anyone about Jesus. Because to speak of Jesus and his love and his coming kingdom, well, that might have a negative effect on your popularity or your reputation, mightn't it? It might make you look like a bit of an idiot, like a bit of a religious nut. People might think you're a bit simple-minded or narrow-minded, a bit unscientific to believe all that Christian stuff. If you want to keep your status, simply carry on not talking about Jesus. But be warned, Christian friend, if you do that. Luke 9:26, Jesus says, "Whoever is ashamed of me and my words, the Son of Man will be ashamed of them when he comes in his glory and in the glory of the Father and of the holy angels." What do you value most? Your status or his? Second point, what does Judas value the most? Verse 3, while he was at Bethany in the house of Simon the leper, as he was reclining at table, a woman came with an alabaster flask of ointment of pure nard, very costly, And she broke the flask and poured it over his head. Now, we know from John's Gospel, chapter 12, a little bit more about this event. So let's set the scene. Jesus is in the house of a guy called Simon the leper. Now, we presume that Simon is a former leper that Jesus must have healed. And Jesus is surrounded by his friends, right? It's an intimate scene. We've got Lazarus there. Lazarus has just been resurrected by Jesus. And we've got Lazarus' sister, Mary, and Martha. And his disciples are all there. This is Christ's new little family enjoying his company. And this would have been a lovely scene, wouldn't it? It would be great to be there. People who loved one another and they loved Jesus, and they're enjoying an evening meal. But there is a wolf in the room. Judas is there. And then Mary, who's the lady in question, she pours out some very expensive perfume all over Jesus. We'll learn more about that later. Judas, we discover from John's Gospel, is the first to object. It's his voice we're hearing in verses 4 and 5. So verse 4, there were some who said to themselves indignantly, why was this ointment wasted like that? For this ointment could have been sold for more than 300 denarii and given to the poor. And then they start to tell Mary off, as if she's done something wrong. They scolded her. So they chewed her out. They burnt her with their words. They made her feel guilty. Verse 6, but Jesus said, leave her alone. Why do you trouble her? She's done a beautiful thing for me. For you always have the poor with you, and whenever you want, you can do good for them, but you will not always have me. Judas is a thief, and he does not care one bit about the poor. As Mary pours out her oil, he sees her pouring money down the drain. In fact, he sees her pouring his money down the drain. He says, well, we could have sold that in Jerusalem. It's Passover time. There are a ton of rich Jews from all over the world in a good mood and ready to spend their money. And this perfume is worth a fortune, at least a year's wages. We're talking some serious cash. Some scholars reckon this perfume could be worth as much as £25,000 in today's money. 25 grand. And Judas would have pocketed a large chunk of that money for himself, wouldn't he? No doubt he would have dressed his theft up a little bit. Yeah, I took 5 grand as a handling fee. You know, there's postage and packaging to think about. This is my commission for selling that. But now Mary's wasting it on Jesus. And to add to his woes even further, Jesus keeps telling everyone that he is on his way to die. Look at verse 8. She's done what she could. She's anointed my body beforehand for burial. Ironically, Judas seems to be the only one of the disciples who understands what Jesus is going on about when he keeps telling them he's going to die. And I think for Judas, the penny drops right here. See, he's been following Jesus around for 2.5 years. Why? Well, he thinks this man is going to retake the throne of his ancestor David. Judas is thinking when that happens, he's going to be promoted into power. He'll be in charge of the treasury. He'll be Israel's answer to Rachel Reeves, right? He'll be in charge of the purse strings. And he will be rich beyond his wildest dreams. But now he's realized this king's destination is not the throne, it's the cross. Being allied with Jesus won't mean earthly riches. It will mean poverty and misery. And Judas doesn't want to be poor. He values currency over Christ. So in verse 10 he thinks, I may as well get some compensation for devoting 2.5 years of my life to this bloke. So off he goes to the chief priests. And they're overjoyed. Christian friend, there's nothing wrong with working hard and making money. It's important to say that. In fact, to be an able-bodied Christian and not work hard, simply to rely on other people for handouts, is a sin. Paul tells us that in 2 Thessalonians 3. But we've got to be careful. We've got to be careful that our priorities are in the right place. We mustn't value earthly riches over Jesus. Never place currency before Christ. There will be times in your Christian life when following Jesus is going to hit your pocket as you support the local church. That standing order can sometimes sting, can't it? Being a Christian means that you might have to turn down promotion, especially if that change in your job is going to impact the way you serve your church. A friend of mine was told off by his boss once. They said, you're spending too much time working for your church. You've got to stop. He ended up having to give up that job. He sacrificed his financial security for his saviour. Pastor friend of mine has a church where some of his members are extremely poor. I'm talking dirt poor. And just like they did in the early church, the richer members share their wealth with the poorer members. No questions asked. They value Jesus and his saints more than they value their own wealth. Well, Christian friend, is that you? How do you see your money? The money in your bank, is it yours? Or have you made it accessible to the King? What do you value most, currency or Christ? Okay, third point, let's rewind to verse 4 and 5 to find out what the disciples valued the most. Look at verse 4. There were some who said to themselves indignantly, can't say that word, why was this ointment wasted like that? For this ointment could have been sold for more than 300 denarii and given to the poor. Now, just as we said, Jesus starts the ball rolling on this argument. And he's disingenuous in his statement, right? He's deceiving people. He doesn't care. But there are others there, presumably the other disciples, who agree with him. And we have to presume that their motives are pure. Their motives are true. They genuinely think that what Mary has done is a waste of money. That they think that morally she's made a big mistake. And they start to tell her off. In fact, they're indignant. They're angry. How could you be so stupid? You're a silly, emotional woman. You don't understand the value of things. We were in a position a few months ago, if you remember. We had thousands of people who needed bread, and we didn't have the money to feed them. And now you've taken this precious perfume, and rather than take it to Sotheby's and sell it at auction, you've smothered it all over Jesus. You've wasted a fortune. What an idiot. Don't you care about the poor and the hungry? These disciples, whoever they were, aren't wrong to want to do good for poor people. Unlike Judas and the chief priests, they're starting off with a pretty good motive. But they've got their values in the wrong order. That's why we played the game at the beginning, right? All of those items, the car, the chair, the cardigan, they all had value. But in reality, what was the most valuable? What thing demanded the most attention? What thing should we make our priority? If we're going to spend money, what's the first thing we should spend money on? Well, says Jesus, it's not, and this might come as a shock, it's not on poor people. Giving random poor people money and buying them food is not your first priority as a Christian, he tells us. Now, a lot of established churches will say it is. Oh, that's why the church exists, got to help the poor. But look what Jesus says, verse 6. Leave her alone. Why do you trouble her? She's done a beautiful thing for me. For you always have the poor with you, and whenever you want, you can do good for them. But you will not always have me. Because we live in a fallen, broken, sin-sick world, Jesus says there are always going to be poor people. Why are people poor? Let's open it up. I've thought of 4 ways. Some people are poor because of bad circumstances, aren't they? In human terms, you could say they were unlucky. They've had one bad turn of events after another, and now they've got nothing left. Perhaps they had a business that failed. Perhaps they had a broken marriage or something, and they've lost all their money. Some people are poor because of geography. This is the main reason. They were born into a poor country, and they've got no way of improving their life. Some people are poor because of genetics. I've got a friend who's incredibly smart. He does mathematical equations for fun. In his spare time, he's like Good Will Hunting. He's just got like algebra going on. He's got an incredibly well-paid job as a result, because he's smart. Well, it works the other way as well, doesn't it? Someone perhaps who isn't too gifted intellectually isn't going to become the CEO of Microsoft. In fact, relatively speaking, they might be considered poor. Some people are born with disabilities, aren't they? Some disabilities are so bad people can't work. They need constant care. They're never going to be rich. And of course, some people are poor because of sin. Their money has been lost due to addiction or lust or stupidity. They frittered their wealth away. At the school where I was a chaplain, there was a big mural on the playground wall, and it said, "Make poverty history." I didn't have the heart to tell them they were wasting their time with that, right? It's an unachievable goal. And you might think, that's a bit harsh. But you can buy as many Coldplay albums as you want. You can jump in a bar full of beans for comic relief. You can keep handing money to the tramp outside of the tube station. But you're never going to rid the world of poor people, because our world is sick. And poverty is a symptom of the world's disease. Now, that's not an excuse for Christians to be cold and heartless, though, is it? You don't say to the cancer patient, well, no morphine for you today, because, what's the point? No, Jesus says, give to the poor whenever you want. Be generous, help them out, love them. Give them food, give them money if you want to. But there is something more valuable. There is something more valuable that the church needs to be getting on with. What is it? Well, 4th point, what should we value the most? Well, we find out from Mary. Simple answer is, we should value what Mary valued. Verse 3. While he was at Bethany in the house of Simon the leper, as he was reclining at table, a woman came with an alabaster flask of ointment of pure nards, very costly. And she broke the flask and poured it over his head. I've got to admit, I didn't know much about women's hair before I got married. I just presumed you girls rolled out of bed, right, and looked wonderful. But after a few weeks of being married, I began to hear Keeley talking about hair maintenance, greasy hair, and the need for Pantene and herbal essences and dry shampoo, who knew? And she had a beauty regime. It was a beauty regime that seemed to cost me a fortune. As far as I'm aware now, women don't want greasy hair. Is that right, Beth? You don't want greasy hair, right? Good. All right, I've learned something. 20 years of marriage, right? But in the 1st century, things were different. In the 1st century, you did want greasy hair. Instead of being offered a cup of tea when you went to someone's house, they would take a little bit of olive oil and they would pour it on your head. And if they were rich, that oil might have a hint of perfume in it. Oil can be soothing, can't it? This was the way you would honour your guests. This is how you would warmly welcome someone into your home. Mary, who I think was probably pretty well off herself, grabs a jar from her cupboards. Historians tell us this jar would have had a long neck and it was sealed at the top. I found this online. Probably something like that with a seal at the top. And she breaks the neck of the jar. And she starts pouring this oil out. Not a little bit, not just a tiny bit, but the whole lot gets dumped on Jesus. And this oil is mind-bogglingly expensive. It's made from something called nard. Now, nard is a plant found in India. And it only grows up mountains. So if you want one of those flowers, you've got to get your climbing boots on, right? You've got to go between 3,000 and 5,000 feet up. And you've got to get the plant, you've got to crush up its roots, and that makes the oil. That's why it's so expensive, because to get it is a mission. And we're told Mary's oil is pure nard. It's not been watered down with sunflower oil or olive oil. It's all nard. This is an oil, it's a perfume, and it smells delicious. It's beautiful. Nard was also a medicine. This stuff can heal your wounds. It can relax your muscles. It's antibacterial, so you can use it as a sanitizer. It will cure your dandruff. It apparently eradicates athlete's foot. Now, I don't think Jesus would have had athlete's foot. He wore sandals, but nevertheless, you get the idea. It's a beautiful oil. Verse 6, Jesus says, she has done a beautiful thing to me. Verse 8, she has done what she could. She has anointed my body beforehand for burial. Jesus leaves us in no doubt as to the motives behind Mary's actions. This woman, he says, has just prepared my body for burial. This act, which you lot all think is crazy, is actually a picture of what is about to happen to me. But this is weird though, right? Because Jesus isn't dead at this point. He's very much alive. So what's going on? What's he talking about? What's the point of Mary doing this to him? Why should Mary need to anoint Jesus' body before he's died? Well, the answer comes in chapter 16, verse 1. It says this, when the Sabbath was past, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James, and Salome bought spices so that they might go and anoint him. So when Jesus is crucified, it's done in such a rush that normal undertaking protocol is not followed. They grab his body, they wrap it in grave clothes, and then they sling it in a tomb. But now, 2 days later, his friends want to anoint his corpse with oil and spices. And that would mask the smell of decomposition after death. But as we know, when the women get to the tomb on Sunday morning, there's no corpse to anoint. Do you remember what we read in Psalm 16? Therefore my heart is glad, my whole being rejoices, my flesh also dwells secure. For you will not abandon my soul to Sheol or let your Holy One see corruption. Jesus hasn't got a dead body because he's alive. There is no decay. There's nothing to be masked or covered up. And in fact, Jesus' body gets transformed. On Easter morning, he rises with an everlasting, indestructible body that can never die. Honouring Jesus in death can't take place after his death. And therefore, Mary honours his death before his death. No, it's a different Mary to the two who go to the tomb. It's not Mary, the mother of Martha, who goes to his tomb. Why? Well, because she knows Jesus can't be anointed. This is the woman to whom Jesus said, I am the resurrection and the life. So she knows he's coming back. And so she honours him before he dies. What should we, as Christians, value most in life then? Power, status, money, helping others? Well, no, the most precious thing in Mary's life was the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. His coming death is what she valued the most. And therefore, it's what we should value the most. If we lose Jesus' death and resurrection, we've lost everything. Fail to see the value of his death and resurrection, and you will be lost eternally. See, it's Jesus' death that has won us our freedom, hasn't it? It's Jesus' death that unlocks for us the riches of God's kingdom. If we lose sight of the historical significance of the burial and resurrection of our King, we may as well throw in the towel. If you haven't understood that, you haven't understood the gospel. Verse 9, truly I say to you, wherever the gospel is proclaimed in the whole world, what Mary has done, will be told in memory of her. This is the gospel right here. And it's that Jesus' death and resurrection is glorious. Why? Well, because Jesus died for us. He fulfilled the law for us. And he rose for us. And as a result, we're told in the New Testament, we've died with him. And we've fulfilled God's law with him. We've been declared righteous with him. And one day we will rise with him. And Jesus wants us to know this morning that those events are the most valuable events in the whole of history. They cost him everything. Therefore, like Mary's costly perfume, wherever his words are accepted, you're breathing in that sweet smell of God's love and affection. And like oil, you're being greeted and welcomed into God's royal households. And like medicine, your wounds and your sins are being healed by the hands of God himself. Christian friend, is there anything on this planet that you would rather spend your money on than proclaiming the beautiful, sweet-smelling, life-giving words of the gospel of Jesus Christ, our Lord? What do you value the most?